So, I've been working on Space is Not Empty today, and going through the library bins because I don't have a shelf for this stuff. Always living in storage, living in storage is actually on one of these hard drives over here. That was this novel that I started writing after moving my aunt out of her apartment and my uncle out of his apartment, two of them together out of their apartment near Mount St. Denis in Toronto. Now, my uncle, of course, no blood relation, had schizophrenia, or at least that was the diagnosis. And he was on a lot of antipsychotics. And my aunt, had an unfortunate event happen to her in her younger years, and she had a meltdown. And they treated her. This was in the late 80s, or not late 80s, late 70s, early 80s. And I'm not going to get into details, but it was a traumatic event for her, and she's been on disability ever since. And if I haven't gotten into this, my uncle, he was into researching, theology, history, and occultism and stuff like that. Really extremely interested in it, and their mental health experiences inspired me to start writing because going into their basement apartment, especially since they were such heavy smokers, and not out of kind of out of touch with reality because of the medications that they're on. That the walls were stained with the tar of the smoke, which is a real thing, and the novel is Life in Storage. It was about the central character, the protagonist, going through shock treatments and the fracturing of his personality from different viewpoints, not only from the external, from the clinical aspect, but also from the internal dialogue between all the fractured pieces of his personality. And all of them were based off of people in my life at the time. And not knowing it about Finnegan's Wake, or just trying to remember his name. Not knowing about James Joyce, but obviously going through literature and art in my high school years. I can't remember exactly if this is true, but again, I'm trying to remember because this was before I moved my aunt up north, and before my uncle passed away from, I think it was cancer or heart disease or something like that. And that's where I got Robbie the robot here. He had more than a few of them stashed away in the closet. It was wise because that Robbie over there is an artifact of the era now, and it works. A lot of them worked. Some of them were broken. The tongue didn't quite come out or whatever, and to make it more distinct, that Robbie is a Canadian made. It doesn't have the same markings on the bottom side as the American ones. So that's the important distinction. Now, if I'm going to talk about the novel and how that relates to other artists and say what's happening to me right now with Instagram and YouTube, with this censorship and the fracturing of society and people's minds, and the paranoid schizophrenia that is the internet, because that's what it is now. The internet, by my diagnosis, is paranoid schizophrenic through my observations. And all of these controls, because, again, from the micro up to the macro of, sensibility and reason. But when you think about stream of consciousness writing and experimental works, then, of course, I'm looking at Finnegan's Wake. And I was writing this, this slowly degrading into incomprehensible junk, where at some point in the novel, throughout the novel, the different fractured parts of the person's of the protagonist's personality would start being disappearing through the halls of all of them living in a storage facility. The idea that some people live in storage units, and because that's all they can afford, or something along those lines. Poverty, how poverty can fracture someone, and how traumas can fracture someone into nothingness. And so that every time that the protagonist was going to have a shock treatment, that one of the compartmentalized, right, one of the compartmentalized pieces of that man would disappear, and eventually, and then from the other side, an externalized monologue of the sensory perception of what's going on when you're in treatment, just by my imagination here, that again, the thoughts become incomprehensible and darker and less distinguishable, and more just like more towards catatonia, and things get murkier as you get older. Not everything is as clear cut as we think it's going to be when we're children. This idealized, innocent perception of society and reality. And I never finished the novel. I don't remember how. If I read it, I might be embarrassed by it, or I might just publish it the way it is. I think that might be good, because it was fine on its own. I think I wrote about 400 pages of it, somewhere around those lines. And then just for it to just to drop off at the middle, without any further explanation, on a cliffhanger, could possibly be the very best outcome of that novel. Because after a number of shock treatments in that era, because that's what happened to my grandmother. And because they were using it as a treatment for hysteria, just like the invention of the dildo was used for the treatment of hysteria. And what more is to say about that? I don't have any more information. Now I'm looking. If you want to see an embarrassing pictures, I have some from grade 4 here, and I was never antisocial. I never was. I just never felt like I was part of the community. I was never part of the in crowd. It's just the things that you go through when you're kids, right? Like making a tie-dye shirt here. There's me running. And with a teddy bear. Photographs and memories. Worth more than money. And I'm sitting here. Again, I was working on Space is Not Empty. And I'm listening to Debussy. And the backdrop for the loop, which is, let me show it on. Rêverie, la fille aux cheveux de lin, petit suite en bateau, embarrasque un de clair de lune. And well, everyone knows the short story about Monet, where in his later years his paintings became much looser. And I have this collection of books, which I said in one of the other art talks that eventually I would break it out, and it's this one, The Great Artists, right here, and they're in perfect condition. So that's Goya. And here we are, Monet. This one is a bit scarred here, but that doesn't really matter. And just to tell you how much the people that wrote these books and put them together, the collation, the collection, the photography and everything, how much they valued Van Gogh. The sunflowers that those women destroyed. And for what? What did they gain? Notoriety? So I'm not going to read from Wikipedia. I'm going to read from this. And I don't exactly remember Anita Ordvenko. That's who they belong to. And there's an article about the water lilies. And I look at the water lilies and some of the, just by chance, some of the echoes that are in Space is Not Empty right now. Look at this guy here. And people wonder why I get angry. And the innocence of my inner child says, why do you hate me? Why do you hate me? What is your fucking problem? Why are you so jealous? Why do you hate me? Why do you hate what is beautiful? The things that I make. Why do you hate me? I've spent most of my life dedicated to art in some form or capacity, or aviation in some form or capacity. And to be ignored is the greatest insult. Is the greatest insult. Because of politics, because of a difference in intelligence or motivation and drive. Because I've painted stuff like Monet. I know I can see it, direct influence, whether I like it or not. And Van Gogh. Like, there's no denying it in some of these paintings. Claude Oscar Monet, born in Paris on November 14th, 1840, was the elder son of a grocer. So many artists come from poverty. And they're tortured by other people. In 1845, the family moved to Le Havre, where Monet, in addition to the normal school curriculum, studied drawing, for which he had shown an early inclination, under Francois-Jacques Rochard, a pupil of David. As a youth, he displayed a flair for the caricature, but after 1858, under the guidance of the landscape painter Eugène Baudouin, his first real teacher, he came to love painting outdoors, or en plein air. In 1859, he went to study painting in Paris, where he was for a time a regular visitor to the salon, attracted by the work of Davigny and Troyon, the latter, to whom he had been given a letter of introduction by Baudouin, showed interest in his work and gave him encouragement. Despite all advice to the contrary, Monet pursued his studies independently, both in the studio of Charles Jacques and the Free Académie Suisse, where he met Pissarro. Familiarity with the work of the painters such as Delacroix and discussions of the Brasserie de Martyr, a favorite haunt of art students, no doubt played the most effective parts in enriching his cultural heritage and widening his artistic experience. In the autumn of 1860, he was conscripted for military service and sent to Algiers with Les Chasseurs d'Afrique. Early in 1862, however, he returned to Le Havre to convalesce from anemia, and his family eventually agreed to buy him out of the army, provided that he, in return, promised to enter the studio of a serious painter. Thus, on his return to Paris in the autumn, he entered the studio of Charles Gallier, where he made the acquaintance of Frédéric Basile, Pierre Auguste Renoir, Alfred Sisley, Alfred Sisley, who were to remain his lifelong friends. The most significant contacts he established during this period were those with Edouard Manet, with whom he met at an exhibition in 1863, and Gustave Courbet, whom he met the following year. After the closing of Gullière's studio, there were, however, extremely difficult years for Monet, a time of growth and struggle during which he was involved in constant wrangling with his family, who strongly disapproved of his independent and rebellious behavior and accordingly denied him any financial support. Monet nevertheless painted unceasingly out of doors in the forest of Fontainebleau, yeah, along the banks of the Seine and in Normandy. The only help which he obtained came from his artist friends, from Courbet, for instance, and in particular from the devoted Basile. After his full-length portrait of Camille Dancieux, he attracted favorable comment when he exhibited the Salon in 1866. His family once again agreed to help him. Shortly afterwards, however, when he visited them, they learned that he was living with Camille. They responded to urging him to leave her. Monet had left Camille behind in Paris, and while he was away, she gave birth to a son, Jean. Completely destitute, Monet was unable to even raise the money to pay for his return to Paris, from Saint Adresse, where he was staying with an aunt. In 1870, he married Camille, and in the same year, he moved to London. France had declared war on Prussia, a war in which his friend Basile was to lose his life. He later spent some time in Belgium and returned to Paris towards the end of 1871. Renting a small house at Argenteuil, Argenteuil. Yeah, it's a bit, again, you're getting my bouche anglaise. Pardonnez-moi. Je suis désolé. He was no longer hounded by the poverty which in his early years had driven him, fortunately without success, to attempt suicide, but he was still burdened with the economic problems. Now, however, he was free to devote his energies almost entirely to painting, thanks especially to the support of Paul Durand-Ruel, the only art dealer who had faith in the innovations of Monet and his friends. Renoir, Sisley, Camille Pissarro, Paul Cézanne, together with Edgar Degas and Berthe Morisot, they formed a group of whom Durand-Ruel organized an exhibition in 1874. This group was satirically accorded the name Impressionists, derived from the title of one of Monet's works, Impressionism, Soleil Levant. Similar exhibitions were subsequently held in 1876, 1877, 1879, 1880, 1881, 1882, and 1886. Monet himself did not contribute to several of these because of a disagreement with the promoters. Early in 1878, he moved from Argenteuil to Vitheux, something more Spanish, Vitheux. Camille's state of health for some time was a cause of concern, had become precarious after the birth of her second son, Michael. She died in September 1878. Let's look up these places. So it's 60 kilometers northwest of Paris. The Val d'Oise. This sounds like Oiseau. I guess I'll finish this. For some years, Monet led an unsettled life, moving constantly between Poissy, Orangeville, Dieppe, Pourville, and Étretat. Especially in 1883, he decided to settle in Gervigny, from where he often traveled southwards alone or accompanied by Renoir. In the early 1880s, his financial situation showed distinct signs of improvement. A number of the exhibitions held at the Durand Ruel and Petit Galerie were favorably received by the critics, and a considerable number of works sold. In 1890, Monet was finally able to buy the house in which he was living at Giverny. 2 years later, he married Alice Hochedet, the widow of a collector who had several children. His wanderings became less extensive, but he paid a brief visit to Normandy and visits to Norway, London, Madrid, to see the works by Velasquez, and Venice. The completion of his water garden and the care of his plants and flowers, which he constantly painted, became after painting his main preoccupation. He was indifferent to the reputation which he had gained as the greatest living French artist and to the glory attained after surmounting so many ordeals. He was conscious only of a despairing sense of failure, a yearning to transcend his achievement, to draw nearer each day to a completely accurate representation of his impressions. Sustained by this singleness of purpose, undiminished even by the tragic failure of his sight, he continued to work on his last canvases until he died in his house in Giverny on December 5th, 1926. Something's been lost. Again, this is why. And this book has been marked, by damage, by this damage. Don't ask me how that happened, but when we don't value art, there is no life. You can have all the money in the world and it doesn't mean shit. You have all the power in the world, it doesn't mean shit. But to give a woman an orgasm, that's something else. Some of this is just done over a raw canvas. And I'm going to pick out one of my favorites here. Because, you know, he changed his style. And if you know the work of Hitler, then you'll see his influences. And Monet was definitely one of them. You know, you look at this. Saint-Germain the Arrois. I'm not saying I'm Hitler. But when artists in society don't get appreciated, and when degeneracy and liberalism flourishes, the rules of law fail. You know, lots of scumbling with Impasto, you know, because he was doing these very quickly. Winter scene, the village street, Vithilieu. But I really like the Rue Montorgueil, bedecked with flags. And some people, they just look at my art and they say, that's shit. It's not worth my time. This is probably going to be it here. I'll pull this panel out. I really like this one. It's the Grand Canal in Venice, because I like purple and green, right? And this is where I pull some of my style from. You know, definitely, because I use a lot of purple for shadows, and Prussian blue, dioxane purple, and Payne's gray. Because there's a lot of lights in the shadows, right? You can obviously go pull this up on your own. And water lilies, Gaverny, etc. I don't deserve to be censored because of my views. I don't deserve to be silenced because I'm better than some people, or because I've dedicated my life to something. I deserve a woman. And so many other people take these things for granted. Look at how far we've come. Look at how far we've fallen. Thanks for listening to this art talk about Monet and me.